Are you, like me, worried about contracting COVID? I personally am extraordinarily worried about COVID in that I experience a mental health condition in which I may be at greater risk than the general population for mental health symptoms due to COVID. I know already, thanks to the stress and the economic fallout and the worry about the disease itself, I'm already experiencing added what I might call symptoms of my condition, which is schizophrenia, symptoms like anhedonia, or meaning like lack of pleasure in activities that I normally like, or depression or anxiety or self-criticality. All these things are compounding now with the COVID worry. But if I get COVID, then I'm worried that I may have ongoing mental health symptoms that are even worse than I've already got. And this is the topic of today's webcast. I'm Brandon Staglin, and welcome to One Mind Brainwaves. Viewers, thank you so much for watching. More evidence appears every day that in addition to the well-known respiratory effects of the COVID disease, there are also sometimes long-term cognitive impairments that can appear, and neurological symptoms that can appear, like headache and fatigue and confusion. They can last longer than the general symptoms of the disease itself. A minority of people afflicted have even developed the onset of psychosis due to the COVID that they've contracted. In today's program, we'll be talking with two leaders in world neuroscience on the effects of COVID on brain health. And these two leaders are Dr. Stephen Hyman and Dr. Husseini Manji. And later, we'll hear from our wonderful One Mind Cyber Guide team about an app that may be just what the doctor ordered for coping with stress in these difficult times, a mental health app. Dr. Tasha Golden is a senior arts and health researcher at the International Arts and Minds Lab at the Johns Hopkins University. She's also a collaborator on our One Mind Music and the Brain project. She and her partner have made music and toured worldwide as the critically acclaimed band Ellery. And we're so happy to have her here to perform for us on Brainwaves. Tasha, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Indeed, Tasha, it's great to see you again. And great to work with you over the time we've worked together. It's great to work with you overall.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, and I've learned over this time that you're not only a scholar and a practitioner and scientist, but you're also an artist, which is really exciting. And it's a kind of interesting story about how your fans and your listeners to your music have inspired you to apply your music to the work you do in science and public health. Can you tell a bit about how that came to be, please?
Yes. Well, I couldn't have imagined that I would wind up wanting a PhD in anything, let alone a STEM field. I was really in the artist career for the long haul. But I had songs when I was touring about issues like depression, which is something in my own history, major depressive disorder. I had songs about my family's history of domestic violence. And no matter where we went in the world, from Nashville to Beijing, those were the songs that people would line up after shows to talk about. And so I've had hundreds of people tell me really intimate stories about their own histories with these kinds of issues and others. And as well as dozens of people who told me that I was the first person they had ever told about a history like of abuse or some other really difficult experiences. So I started to wonder, because I knew what it had meant to me to have access to friendships and resources and relationships where I could discuss these experiences and work through them. I knew that had mattered so much to me. So I began to wonder, if I'm the first person that these folks have talked to about these issues, then what does that mean for their relationships with their doctors, for their experiences with spouses and partners? It means they didn't have anybody looking at that issue with their health. And so I began to think of access to the arts and the ability to express your experiences through something like a song or a painting even, as a matter of public health. And I wound up going off the road and getting into academia in order to study how the arts makes things talk aboutable, really, which is the word that I use all the time, and why that's essential for our health, but also just for our social fabric and the ways that we interact or can't.
It's fascinating to hear you talk about how you've dedicated part of your career to more broadly helping people, not only through your music directly and through the stories that you tell through your music, but also through the science that is coming from the research that you do. and how that can be applied to improving care overall for people. That's just really inspiring to hear that you've done that. And it's also very meaningful to hear about how these folks have opened up to you and shared their experiences for the first time. How does that feel to you to be able to help people know they're not alone?
Well, I think it's when I've tried to articulate what has meant the most to me as a singer songwriter, the moments that have always meant the most to me are when somebody has said something along the lines of, I didn't know that I was thinking that, but you said it in a song, and then I realized that's how I had felt too. Or somebody who was able to just say, that is my story also. And I think for songs or for literature, for a lot of different forms of art, theater, film, they give us a way to say something that has happened to us or express that this is my story. Like, for example, somebody could say, that song that you just sang, that's my story too. And by saying that, they've told me that something like that happened to them, but they didn't have to get into the details. They didn't have to re-traumatize themselves by disclosing something, but they were able to share their experience. I think that's part of the magic of art like this, is that you can say something without saying it. You can say it as deeply and powerfully and emotionally as you might want, while still reserving the things that you might need to reserve. And I think that's essential for mental health care and even mental health research.
That's very well said. And I think, yeah, because you're saying that's the essence of like music therapy, helping people express things they couldn't express any other way. So this makes me think, how can art, music, and culture help people deal with traumatic events and other mental health challenges that in ways that conventional mental health approaches might miss?
Well, there's so much, as you know, there's so much science emerging about exactly the mechanisms behind how music or writing or even acting or dance might help somebody work through something, what it might change in the brain, what it might just change as far as the narratives and the stories that we tell ourselves. The stuff that I get particularly excited about in my own expertise, in my own work in public health and health promotion, is the power of narrative and story. The ability to own a story once you're able to, we have some science showing that once you're able to name an emotion, for example, you take away some of its reactivity and you can sit with it. That's some of the basis of mindfulness practices and things like that. But also when you're able to tell your own story, you get to decide the beginning, the middle, you can imagine a different ending for yourself, and you can make meaning of what you've been through by putting it into a story form or even in a poetry form, as abstract or metaphorical as you might want to make it. And part of the ownership and the control that you get from it allows you to change the meaning that story has had for you that might have been handed to you, but you can't make it go away. You can't change what happened in the past, but you can change the story that's being told about it now.
Yeah, when we articulate about what we're experiencing, it helps us to make sense of it for ourselves, and in addition to expressing it for somebody else. So, yeah, that's profound. So, your songwriting is known for its poetic narrative and its emotional weight. The song you're going to sing for us today, "It's All Right," is the name of it, and it expresses both fear and hope. Very briefly, what inspired you to write this song?
Well, I so appreciated you mentioning the song when you asked me to play it, because it's been a long time since I have played it. And I was trying to think of the original inspiration behind it. But over time, I think another magic of songs is that they take on they take on new meanings as you play them in different spaces and places. But what I keep coming back to with this song is that it's in its own kind of dark way, a celebration of being mindful and being present now. That a lot of times the difficulty of the emotions or the pain that we experience is not so much the emotion itself or the pain itself, but the resistance to it. And I think part of what this song is trying to express or get out is the idea that everything that has come before can feed what is coming next. It's all part of it, and there's nothing that has to be dismissed or set aside. There's something to all of it that moves us forward. And in other words, nothing has gone wrong. Life is suffering and its beauty, and they can work together.
I love that philosophy. Like, all experience has value, whether it's pleasant or unpleasant, or whether it's light or dark. A lot to be learned from
or
that.
at least that's a story we can tell about it if we want.
Okay. Well, I like that story. Can we hear the story in its full development as your song, please? Can we hear "It's All Right," please?
Sure. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Remember how we tasted like shadows. Life was the ocean we wanted to swim. looking back now, it's just how the path goes. They tell you it's over, you never begin. We don't give ourselves time the way that we used to watch it all happen, unfolding in sight. You'd think we were blind, the things we can see through, the things we look past when emboldened inside. But it's alright now, it's alright. The ghosts of our glories, our gray-bearded guides, the sound of our sorrow has stirred us inside. I think maybe I've never felt more alive. I think maybe I've never felt more alive. I asked you just once if you thought we could be found. You never did tell me, but I think I know now. Whatever ship comes by dark sea or gray cloud, as long as the well's deep, we make it somehow. So it's alright now, it's alright. The ghosts of our glories, our gray-bearded guides, the sound of our sorrow has stirred us inside. I think maybe I've never felt more alive. I think maybe I've never felt more alive. I don't know how to make peace or find it, where most of our stories we're scared to explain. But what if there's sound somewhere caught behind this, a song we can sing while we're lying awake? And it's alright now, it's alright. The ghosts of our glories, our gray-bearded guides, the sound of our sorrows stirred us inside. I think maybe I've never felt more alive. I think maybe I've never felt more alive.
Tasha, thank you. That was beautiful. It evoked moments from my own past, my own story. It's like that song is my story. I felt that, just like we were talking about earlier. Thank you very
so
much.
much.
Yeah, absolutely. You're a beautiful singer and a great scientist and practitioner as well. So it's like a triple threat coming from you.
Thank you so
from
much.
you. Yeah, thank you, Tasha, for being with us on Brainwaves today and sharing that.
Thank you. Great to be here. Thank you, Brandon.
Joining me now to discuss the emerging science on COVID and brain health is Dr. Stephen Hyman, who is a former director of the National Institute of Mental Health, currently the Harvard University Distinguished Service Professor of Stem Cell and Regenerative Medicine, as well as the director of the Stanley Center for Psychiatric Research at the Broad Institute of MIT and Harvard, as well as a core member of the Broad Institute. He's also a co-chair of our One Mind Scientific Advisory Board, and we are very, very lucky to have worked with Steve Hyman. Steve, thank you so much for being with us on Brainwaves today.
Great pleasure to be here, Brandon.
Wonderful. Thanks, Steve. So, and viewers, don't forget, you can post questions or comments in our webcast comment section at any time on Facebook. Thank you. So Steve, how are you doing there in Massachusetts today?
Things are okay, but it's been a long time that many of us have not been able to leave home very often or go to work. And of course, frontline workers have the opposite problem. They're always being outside and exposed. And all I can say is we look forward to the dissemination of effective vaccines so that we can get back to something like our lives status before this began.
Definitely. I am too. I just signed up today as an essential worker. I qualify as a vineyard winery worker because my family owns this winery business and I work for it as well as being president of one mine. So I'm in phase 1B of the rollout in California. So I feel lucky to be able to do that. Hopefully I get a vaccine soon. So we've learned a great deal about COVID since it first appeared on the scene in the United States about a year ago. But there are many things we're learning about the virus. And do we know how and if the virus enters the brain and what the effects of it is in terms of causing common long-term cognitive impairments like memory loss, confusion, like how it does that in the brain, if it does that?
Yeah, so, it is, just as you said, it's just about a year since we've been aware of COVID. And while the progress on the vaccine has been absolutely miraculous in terms of producing vaccines, now let's see if we can get organized to distribute them. The science of what it does in the body is still early, and we're still learning. And I wouldn't pretend that we can give any definitive answers. That said, we're beginning to get a lot of experience of what's happening to people who have been infected. And there are several symptoms that affect the nervous system. One is the rather common lack of smell and taste. A second is people have had sometimes small strokes from blood clotting in their vessels, especially if they get quite ill. And that's something hospitals are now anticoagulating people when they enter. And then there is fatigue and cognitive clouding, during the acute illness that some people have. And then when some people recover from their acute infection, they continue to have symptoms. Part of the so-called long hauler syndrome can include some cognitive fuzziness, inability to function. And then, as you mentioned, a small number of people actually have new onset psychosis. So how does this all happen? Well, our evidence to date is that COVID virus does not infect neurons, does not infect the brain by itself. In the case of the loss of taste and smell, it seems that COVID infects the supporting cells, the glia surrounding the nerve cells that we need to smell and taste, and creates an inflammatory response that damages those nerve cells. Most people, it seems, do recover their smell and taste as they get better, but some people, again, continue to have this very debilitating lack of ability to smell and taste. And this makes food uninteresting at best, aversive at worst, and can lead to all kinds of problems, as you could imagine. The cognitive clouding with acute illness is not particularly understood in detail, but it's a feature of many severe infectious diseases. And it is thought that it is mediated not by, again, the virus infecting the immune system, but by the immune system itself. That is, many immune cells make signaling molecules, mediators called cytokines. And some of these cytokines have the effect of producing what's been called sickness behavior. And basically, in good measure, sickness behavior is protective. It means that when you're quite ill and have to hold on to your resources, you're tired, you don't feel like going out and doing anything, and as a result, you again can use all of the energy available to your body and to your immune system to fight the infection. And perhaps another advantage is that you don't run around infecting other people. In fact, as we know, it's asymptomatic people with COVID who are responsible for a pretty substantial fraction of the infections out in the world. And then the long haul cognitive problems, I think, are really not understood. And in all likelihood, these again reflect some chronic inappropriate activation of the immune system. I could speculate that it still has to do perhaps with cytokines or other immune mediators. We're learning more and more about how the immune system affects brain function. The psychosis, it's rare, but it's really quite dramatic. And there are already known examples of the immune system causing syndromes that look very much like the florid psychosis of a first schizophrenic break, for example. Did you want to ask something?
Yeah, Steve, I was curious about that. So I know that there's been a large-scale, national-scale study on how psychosis develops in young people and the earliest stages of it. And in the latest iteration of it, it's called the North American Prodrome Longitudinal Study, and One Mind has supported this over the years. But the latest iteration of it has been studying inflammation and how that can be involved in the onset of psychosis. And are you familiar with that study?
Yes, I'm familiar, but I think I think that study is really looking at the onset of it just feels like a wrong term, but more typical schizophrenia, the immune system. Maybe I'll come back to it. The immune system does seem to play some role, but maybe not the leading role in the way one usually thinks about it in the onset of schizophrenia. But in the case of COVID-related psychosis, we don't know, but it may very well be that the body, in attempting to make antibodies to neutralize the virus, makes antibodies that also attack innocent bystander molecules in our brains, important receptors, for example, and maybe that is the cause of the psychosis. Why am I saying this? It's a wild speculation, but there are known cases. There is a syndrome called anti-NMDA receptor psychosis. The NMDA receptor is just a critical part of neuronal signaling. And once in a while, a person will develop antibodies against their NMDA receptor. The most common known cause is a small benign tumor that is more common in younger women. It's called a teratoma. But other times, this syndrome occurs without any known. People look for a tumor. They should look for a tumor. They find nothing. And this the symptoms can be very much like schizophrenia or even acute mania. But of course, they can go on. People can have seizures, and it's very important to make this diagnosis. Also, the treatment is very different from schizophrenia. The treatment is aimed at the immune system more than at the dopamine receptors in the brain. Maybe COVID psychosis is antibody mediated, like this anti-NMDA syndrome. Now, there's a really excellent popular book that's been written about it's called Brain on Fire by Susanna Cahalan.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you about that. Is that the Brain on Fire quote unquote syndrome that people have read about or seen in the movie?
Yeah. Now we don't know that COVID is doing this, but it's certainly a distinct possibility. And one of the things that that we do need to learn, going back to Naples, and Naples didn't do this, it did an awful lot, is whether some people who are diagnosed with schizophrenia actually have, some small subset, but actually have an antibody-mediated syndrome. And right now, to discover that, you'd have to do a lumbar puncture and withdraw some cerebrospinal fluid. And, that's not typically done any longer in the United States. But there is a risk of missing these rare, but importantly, treatable early causes, this brain on fire syndrome.
Yeah, this is fascinating to think there can be so many different types of causes for what look like the same thing in the symptoms, right?
Absolutely.
It kind of goes against the intuition, right? But I wanted to ask you about the long haulers you talked about earlier and some of their lingering symptoms, and could that impede their ability to work and function normally over a long period of time, and also perhaps about the number of people who experience psychosis due to COVID. We know it's a relatively small number, but based on a calculation I did based on the New York Times article, which we both talked about it offline before, could be around, and I don't know if this is the right number, but based on the numbers in the article, it looked like about 5% of people might experience psychosis.
I wouldn't hazard a guess percentage, but what I think we can say is that, worldwide there have now been millions of cases of COVID, right? And so even the small percentage of a common phenomenon will give you a lot of cases.
Yeah.
Right?
So,
it becomes an important cause.
Yeah. So what I'm getting at, there are many, many people who suffer from mental and neurological fallout due to COVID. How will this affect our society and our workforce into the future, do you think?
Well, before we I'll come back to long haulers then, but I mean, there are a number of other issues. You, at the outset in your introduction, you mentioned anxiety. You could have mentioned depression, and that's a big problem. And some people have become, for example, either anxious and depressed because of their work and their financial status. They're just out there being exposed every day, and there are some people who are failing to wear masks who could infect them. And, for people who are susceptible, it could launch a new full-blown episode of anxiety and depression that would outlast. Imagine we have successfully vaccinated people by the summer. It doesn't mean that everybody who's been afflicted with anxiety and depression is going to feel well. The second thing is a lot of people, conversely, are isolated, and especially elderly people. And isolation by itself can be a cause of anxiety and depression, and again can take on a life of its own, and initiate severe episodes of these conditions. We've mentioned the psychosis.
My apologies. I couldn't hear what you said.
No, I'm sorry. That's Siri. Quiet, Siri. And then the long haulers we do not yet understand, but it's important to recognize that this is not something that is, quote, brand new. There are a number of people who have suffered infectious diseases. A good example of this is Lyme disease, where we do not understand exactly what's going on. It certainly is possible, maybe even likely, that it's the immune system misfiring and being overactive long term. But many people with these symptoms have initially been doubted by their families, even by physicians, because all of their normal indices of infection are now normal. Their white count is normal. They don't have a fever, and so on and so on. But whatever the cause is, it is unknown. And I think, again, COVID is so tragically unnecessarily, but so common in our world that it will be very important for people to take these symptoms very seriously and begin to understand what's causing them. Because again, having these long haul symptoms may actually cause a depression secondarily, but it would be a mistake to just say, oh no, you're just depressed. Oh no. We better figure this out.
Yeah, it's important to understand the causes so that we know how to treat, kind of like we were talking about the last question. Speaking of causes, the Broad Institute was founded in 2004 as an experiment in a new way of doing science, a collaborative, integrative approach to improving human health involving genomics. And does genomics have something to say about the risk or the development of COVID symptoms? And can it improve research and perhaps treatment by looking at genomics?
Well, there are people at the Broad, of course, but really around the world, looking at the reasons why two people can be infected. There have even been reported identical twins who have been infected who have very different experiences with COVID infection. But the point is, some people have very serious infections. Some people have almost no symptoms or no symptoms at all. One of the important differences are in people's genomes, but that's not the only difference. It's really important not to try to reduce all of this to different genetics. A really important, obvious potential cause is the dose of the virus that somebody's infected with. Somebody who's infected with tenfold more viral particles than somebody else is likely to get a lot sicker. That's a pretty straightforward principle of infectious disease. But nutritional status, prior infections, and very importantly, inter-individual differences in how their immune system has developed. Our immune systems after birth and regardless of our underlying genetics, elaborate all kinds of different receptors and form different kinds of antibodies to be ready for some unknown virus. And depending on chance, some people may fight the virus better than others, get sicker than others. But then again, yes, genomics matters. And there are a lot of people sequencing individuals who've been infected and starting to do, I think, insightful comparisons between those who get very sick and those who don't. But we're gonna have to integrate all of these factors.
Yeah, this is really fascinating. Think about all the different things that go into someone's risk or development of the disease for them. So individual in so many ways, both biology and someone's experiences can contribute to that. Yeah. So finally, Steve, we mentioned the Broad Institute a moment ago, and your colleague at the Broad Institute, Dr. Eric Lander, has recently been appointed to lead the Office of Science and Technology Policy for the new administration in leading our nation. In science and technology policy for everyone.
We're so proud of Eric, and we're happy with that decision. Although we'll miss him, it's a loss for us because he's so smart and visionary and energetic. But it's really good for the country. And also, as a scientist who's been arguing for this among groups of scientists for many years. The head of the Office of Science and Technology Policy will now sit in the cabinet because science, has a role everywhere, and should be, taken into account at a minimum in making lots and lots of decisions.
Yeah, definitely. So how do you think this will influence the future of neuroscience for the United States? And
neuroscience, well, we hope that but after a 4-year hiatus, a respect for the importance of science will return. Eric, of course, will play a role in thinking about something very important today, which is the public reception of science. There's so many people who who want, for example, to doubt the severity or even the reality of COVID. Of course, the virus has other ideas and reality will bite back, but the public reception of science is really important. And, we can't wait to say one day we'll improve K through 12 science education. We better figure out also shorter term approaches to the public reception of science, but also just greater emphasis on the role of science in facing the nation's problems is good for neuroscience, but it's good for all of science.
Fantastic. And Eric is such a great communicator as well as a scientist. He graciously spoke at one of my music festival for brain health several years ago, and he really brought the house down. Everybody loved his talk, and I learned so much from it about genomics and mental health. I'm very proud of that as well.
Brandon, I heard that talk, but I think the best thing that he does, and it prepared him to give that talk for you guys, is that he teaches freshman biology. I guess he's going to have to give that up, but that's, to have a scientist at that level dedicated every year to teach freshman biology, in this case at MIT, that's a really good sign, right?
Yeah, it's great. And they say, like, if you can explain what you're doing to somebody who's a layperson, I think the saying is to your grandmother, then you know what you're doing is significant, right? And so clearly what Eric is doing is significant. What you're doing is very significant at the Broad Institute, Stanley Center. Steve, thank you so much for being with us on Brainwave today, sharing your wisdom, your insights. Really appreciate all that you do. So with me now is Dr. Husseini Manji, the Global Head of Science for Minds at Johnson & Johnson. Husseini, welcome to Brainwaves.
Thank you, Brandon. It's a real pleasure to be with you here today.
Likewise, great to see you again. So the Science for Minds project launched just a few months ago as a consortium for the research and treatment and improvement of these things for mental health and brain disorders. Can you describe your mission, how it works, and what you hope to achieve with it, please?
I'm sure, Brandon. So I've basically been in neuroscience and mental health. All my career, I was at the U.S. National Institutes of Health for 15 years, where I was the head of the Mood and Anxiety Disorders program. And then I was at J&J spearheading all our neuroscience efforts in neurodegenerative disorders and mental illnesses. And we've made a lot of progress, but I felt we needed even more. And, as you know, the neuroscience, we're dealing with some of mankind's most challenging conditions, and I felt we needed more to tackle it. So I was delighted to launch this Science for Minds initiative, which is basically going to be a focused enterprise that tries to bring together the three pillars of science, innovation, and society to build this research culture to make a real difference for our patients worldwide. And we're basically going to be focusing on dementia, because as you've probably heard, that's, that's sometimes spoken of as the impending tsunami. With our global aging population, the numbers are going to triple. Serious mental illnesses, especially those affecting our youth, and the use of novel digital technologies to support these goals, basically to fundamentally alter how we study, diagnose, and treat these disorders. I think one of the things that we've also seen is that, one of the biggest breakthroughs is when you can come up with novel treatments. Despite the unmet need in neuroscience, most large pharma companies have actually left neuroscience, and certainly nearly all have left mental health. So we really think that through these efforts, if we can really understand more about the biology of these conditions, how to make a difference, we'll be able to get people more excited about mental health and making a difference. The last thing I'll mention, and it's particularly timely that you had Tasha, who was terrific on this event, is we're also launching something called Science Over Stigma. And that's an initiative that's trying to bring together leading public, private, and NGOs basically committed to ending stigma to those touched by mental health challenges. And what we'd like to do is actually bring together folks to address three areas. One is advocacy, to integrate the ecosystems of initiatives, to identify consistent mass messaging and opportunities. The second one is focus on science and research, really create the understanding that mental health should be treated no different from any physical health condition. And most importantly, given Tasha's participation, is arts and culture. So capture the hearts and minds at a scale by leveraging the power of storytelling, expressive arts, and celebrity to fuel the dialogue. And we're delighted that some of our partners include UNICEF, the Milken Institute, Harvard, Ken Cole Mental Health Initiative, obviously One Mind for Research, the Healthy Brains Global Initiative, the Stability Network, JED Foundation, the Kennedy Forum, and many more. So in summary, those are the kinds of things we want to undertake under the umbrella of Science for Minds.
Well, that's a powerhouse group that Science for Minds and Science Over Stigma has assembled, and I think there'll be no stopping the momentum that's going to come out of that. One Mind is very proud to be a part of that initiative, and very grateful for all the support that Johnson & Johnson has provided over so many years, and enabling us to make discoveries that couldn't be made any other way. So thank you, Husseini, for that support as well.
Yeah.
At Johnson & Johnson, you're also collaborating, as you mentioned, along with One Mind and the National Academy of Medicine on the Healthy Brains Global Initiative, which is a worldwide approach to improving brain health across the world. What is your vision for helping people with mental health conditions throughout many nations around the world?
So basically, all my career, I've been involved certainly in doing our own research, but also recognizing there's a lot to be said for working together. And in many cases, when you work together, you can go much further. And so, when I was at the NIH, I spearheaded the biomarkers consortium related to neuroscience. And, there's been very powerful to come up with biomarkers, for example, related to understanding who may be at risk of a certain illness. Can you identify them very early, long before they have the full-blown illness? We've been involved in a number of these initiatives. And I think the power of some of these things that are sometimes called public-private partnerships, I think they do more than speed up innovation. They also increase the diversity and volume of research by providing an environment for tackling problems that any individual stakeholder couldn't solve on their own. And I think we recognize that the role of the different stakeholders, for example, whether it's academics or companies or governments, et cetera, may differ by the stage of the research undertaken, from ideation to facilitation to execution, but we all have a role to play. I think one of the keys to success is that the problems need to be solved, need to be clearly identified, and then there's genuine trust amongst everyone that we're going to be doing it to benefit all. I think there's a lot of great examples of things that we're part of. So one is obviously an example in the data sciences. So we're part of something called the UK Biobank Initiative, where they've taken on an ambitious whole genome project initiative, which is, I think, the single most ambitious project of a kind in the world. And what they're doing is collecting data from large populations of people with a number of common conditions that affect the health of many of us. And it may hold the key to identifying precision treatments for a range of conditions tailored to the genetic makeup and the environmental factors affecting those individuals. One of the other things we were also very proud to launch about 6 years ago, former UK Prime Minister David Cameron hosted a G8 summit on dementia that I was pleased to participate in. And since then, we launched a Dementia Discovery Fund, which Bill Gates has joined and is now at about £350 million. And it's basically really related to trying to come up with novel targets and exploring novel ways of undertaking biology. So I think these sort of public-private partnerships can have a lot of benefit. Healthy Brains Global Initiative is very ambitious. I'm sure it'll be successful. It's aiming to bring $10 billion with a B dollars of new research funding to tackle on the mental health challenges. It's focusing primarily in the youth. So we're starting with a focus on 15 to 30-year-olds. And it's primarily mental health with epilepsy and traumatic brain injuries, which also interface with mental health conditions as the focus. And we're going to focus on basic science, but basic science that are human-driven. So we're not starting with rodents, but we're starting with human biology. Translational science, which is one of the main things you need to really try and see how can you intervene. And intervention could be pharmacological, but it could be psychotherapy, it could be other environment, it could be arts, etc. And then what we call implementation science, really trying to understand what works for whom under what conditions. So I'm very optimistic that this is going to make a big difference for mental health and start to really move the needle on mental health.
that sounds like an amazing approach in that it covers all the research bases from science to innovation to society, similar to your Science Over the Science for Minds program. I think that's similar to One Mind's approach of science services society. So I think we're all on the same page. It's kind of great synergy here. And you articulated that so beautifully. It's like hearing an orchestra of different players come together to all achieve a common, artistic goal, but in this case, it's a scientific goal. So thanks for going over that. Fantastic. And this makes me think, you've said that discovering successful solutions to challenging mental health problems around the world would probably need the Manhattan Project. Do you still believe that, especially today with the pandemic happening? And how could a Manhattan Project tackle mental health in the age of the pandemic?
Yeah, I think it's unfortunately more true than ever. So I think, if you've been in the mental health field, as certain you have been, you know that we were actually in a mental health pandemic even before COVID-19. So I'm sure your audience knows a lot about these facts and figures. But basically, the World Health Organization has, identified mental illnesses as amongst the leading causes of disability worldwide. I'd say two main reasons. One is that they're actually quite common. 1 in 4 of us may be touched by these illnesses. But arguably, even more importantly, is by and large, they strike individuals when they're relatively young, usually late adolescence or early 20s, and they're lifelong. So they're the chronic diseases of the young. And unfortunately, we also know that, for example, in the US, there's only 2 forms of cancer that have a higher annual death rate than the death rate from suicide. And as you know, mental health touches everything from, certainly the pain and suffering, but physical health, workplace productivity. And so the cost to society by the World Economic Forum has been calculated as being greater than cancer, diabetes, and chronic lung diseases combined. And then, of course, we've had the impact of COVID. And I think, sort of COVID-19 basically affects us all. From the psychological stress, which, if you think about some of the risk factors in terms of psychological stresses for depression and anxiety, they include the loss of a loved one, acute and prolonged distress, economic distress, and social isolation. And obviously, COVID-19 affects all of them. So COVID-19 has turned up the gain or the volume in all these conditions. I think we have to recognize that we're all on the spectrum, in these conditions. So we're all experiencing, stress and depression and anxiety. But some people are experiencing it even more. And certainly people who have a pre-existing mental illness, they can quite often develop full-blown depression and anxiety. So we certainly need the Manhattan Project. And I think, similar to what we've seen with the Manhattan Project, or perhaps, an example closer to home might be the HIV/AIDS example, where, when AIDS hit our sort of shores, it was a guaranteed death sentence. You were unfortunately going to die within 2 years of AIDS. But society came together, academics, government, industry, patient advocates, people with lived experience, and rolled up their sleeves and worked together so that today in many parts of the world, AIDS is a chronic disease. You have a lifespan that's basically normal. And that's the sort of Manhattan Project type effort we need for mental health. And I'm optimistic that society's awareness is being raised so that we'll be able to mount a similar effort in mental health like we have in other conditions.
Definitely. And I think that your Science Over Stigma project, as well as the HBGI, are great ways to start doing that. So I'm excited about those things. So in terms of words of hope for the so-called COVID long haulers, people who experience long-term mental and neurological effects from the disease of COVID, what words of hope do you have for those folks? And do you foresee better understanding leading to improved treatments as we go down the road?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the most important things to do is to maintain hope. I think when you've got a chronic condition or when you've got something, you say, for example, over the acute infection, and yet we're hearing so much about people, we hear about brain fog, we hear about depression, we hear about anxiety, we hear about weakness. They wonder months later, where's the light at the end of the tunnel? I think there's really a lot of reason to be hopeful, hang in there, to be good to yourself, to realize that, it's almost like if you had a broken limb, you couldn't recover the next day. You need rehab. Sometimes it takes a long time, etc. But hopefully, with the right treatment and care, you can eventually get there. So I think maintaining hope, if you're struggling with a mental illness, getting the treatment and care you deserve and need is very important. Recognize that you're not in this fight alone. Coming back to the other question you said, I think we're learning so much more. Anytime you have this new condition like COVID, it took us a while to learn about it, but now we're learning, and I think most of the data suggests that with COVID-19, while there's some data that the virus itself might, through the nasal passage, infect nerve cells, most of the data suggests that it's not the virus itself that's, infecting the nerve cells. Rather, it's the consequences of the virus. And certainly, if you have the pneumonia, you don't have enough oxygenation to the brain, there's a problem with excessive blood clots, but arguably the most important factor seems to be the immune response. So one of the ways we deal with infections is we turn on this immune system, but it looks like when you excessively turn on the immune system, it can have all kinds of damaging effects. And in particular, there's one of these immune factors called IL-6, which has actually been linked to depression. And we actually did a study when we lowered IL-6, we could show that what's known as anhedonia, which is, the inability to experience pleasure, was improved. So I think we're learning a lot about what might be contributing to the long haulers. And the last thing I'll mention is that the other thing that might turn out to be true, you may have, read that there are some people who seem to have what looks like schizophrenia, but actually they have what's known as an autoimmune disease. So, a condition like MS is an autoimmune disease where you make antibodies, which are attacking part of your nerve cells. It looks like in some cases, people make these antibodies which attack certain receptors called NMDA receptors. And people are speculating that the small percentage of people who develop a psychotic episode after COVID, maybe this is an autoimmune condition. So there's still more research to be done. But I think getting back to your question of hope, I think what people need to recognize is a lot of work being done, and hopefully we'll really understand what the underpinnings are and can provide people with even better treatment and care. And the main message is remain hopeful and make sure you look after yourself and your loved ones.
Great message. Thank you. And there is hope coming from research, as you said. So we're starting to understand how this works. So
yeah,
stay hopeful, folks. There's light at the end of the tunnel. So before we leave, I want to thank you, Dr. Manji Husseini, for sharing your wisdom and experience and insights with our viewers today. Viewers, thank you as well for watching. If you have any questions, feel free to post them during our webcast. You can also share this webcast with anyone you feel might benefit from the knowledge imparted by Husseini, Tasha, or Steve earlier in the webcast. Please do. Before we leave, we'd like to check in with our team at One Mind Cyber Guide for a profile and an evaluation of one of the most popular mental health apps on the market. It may help with mental health challenges you may be experiencing.
Hi, my name is Martha Neary, and I'm the project manager of One Mind Cyber Guide. At One Mind Cyber Guide, we provide advice and guidelines to people who are interested in using mental health apps. Mental health apps can be a great tool to add to your mental health toolkit. Research has shown that apps are especially helpful when used as an add-on to traditional treatment with a licensed provider. In one study, which looked at apps to help reduce depression and anxiety through skills-building exercises, participants saw benefits from using the app for just under 1.5 minutes each time. This suggests that even using an app for a couple of minutes each day might be helpful for you. Most good habits can take a little while to form. Building the use of an app into the daily routine that you already have may help you use it in a more sustained way. For example, maybe you brush your teeth and then use the app, or use it after dinner. Most apps also allow you to set notifications, which can be really helpful to remind you to use the app regularly. Calm is an app for mindful meditation. It aims to help you learn to meditate and build your meditation practice. When you open the app, you'll see a number of features, such as daily meditations and a mood check-in. If you sign up for a premium subscription, you can also access a library of sleep stories, many of which are read by well-known celebrities. And you'll also have access to a music library with playlists to help with focus and relaxation. The meditation library is arranged by topic, and these topics include sleep, anxiety,
beginners, stress, and more. Each topic has a free short course which you can access without a subscription. There's also a handy breathing exercise which you can customize to your own preferences. Calm offers a 7-day free trial. An annual subscription costs $69.99 for 1 year. Other features include being able to set a mindfulness reminder for a time that works for you, and tracking your progress using the app. We've reviewed Calm at One Mind Cyber Guide, and it scores highly on our credibility scale, scoring 4.67 out of 5, and on our user experience scale, scoring 4.40 out of 5. It also has acceptable transparency around data security and privacy. You can learn more about Calm on our app guide at cyber.guide/calm. We look forward to seeing you next week for another app review.
Thanks, Martha. And thank you to Tasha and Steve and Husseini for being with us today. Viewers, thank you as well. Remember, you can always check out our back catalog of Brainwaves episodes at onemind.org/brainwaves. Really appreciate all for participating in our webcast today. Thanks so much and take care.
Every day trying to find the strength. I just want things to go back to normal.
Science is racing to find treatments for the virus. Vaccines are on the horizon.
I don't know what to do.
But what about the mental health research needed to sustain our lives during and after the crisis? One Mind is funding the science to revolutionize treatments and provide hope. One Mind, accelerating brain health for all. Help us fund new treatments at onemind.org.